I think people often hear things that are opportunities and they immediately think, oh, wow, now that would be great for someone. Why not for you? And I don't think that people just let ideas and opportunities like pass them by, like just float right by them because they don't take that moment to consider, maybe I could do that. You don't have to see, as one of the quotes in my book is, you don't have to see the whole staircase. You just have to take the first step.
Welcome to Passion Struck. Hi, I'm your host, John R. Miles, and on the show, we decipher the secrets, tips, and guidance of the world's most inspiring people and turn their wisdom into practical advice for you and those around you. Our mission is to help you unlock the power of intentionality so that you can become the best version of yourself. If you're new to the show, I offer advice and answer listener questions on Fridays. We have long-form interviews the rest of the week with guests ranging from astronauts to authors, CEOs, creators, innovators, scientists, military leaders, visionaries, and athletes. Now, let's go out there and become passion struck. I am absolutely honored and thrilled today to welcome Joan Lunden to Passion Struck. Joan, it is such an honor to have you here today.
It's my delight to be here. I love the idea of this show.
To me, it's surreal because I remember in the late 70s, early 80s as a kid growing up, seeing you on my TV. So it's a full circle moment to have this opportunity to interview you. And I'm even throwing in some questions that my mom and my aunt had who are big fans of you that I'll ask later on in the conversation. But
to get us away, I was growing up on the show. I was 27 when I started Good Morning America. I have all these young kids all the time saying, I grew up with you. And I said, yeah, well, I grew up also on the show.
Well, before millions of people welcomed you into their homes every morning, who did you believe you needed to be in order to feel like you mattered?
Obviously, a trusted voice, a trusted journalist, but you also had to be, for that time of morning, likable, perky. And there's that fine line. At 7 o'clock in the morning, you don't invite your best friend over. The kids aren't dressed. You haven't brushed your teeth. It's an unusual time of day. It's not like being on a primetime show. And we always had that in mind. We understood that. But you're real. People used to always say to either Charlie Gibson or even today, my husband, what's she really like? But you are yourself on a show like that. You have to be. You're there in real time and you're reacting. It's not a scripted show. And I think that the dilemma for a woman, particularly back then when I first went to GMA, like in 1977, I first started as a correspondent, became the host 1980. We weren't supposed to be independent, strong women necessarily. That was still at a time. I remember I had to ask my agent to go to the network. I just had my first baby and I said, ask him if I can bring my baby with me because I'm breastfeeding. He said, you can't even say breastfeeding on television, which was true, which is almost hard to believe. But I made him go have that conversation and damn if they didn't say yes. And then there was that worrisome, are my colleagues going to take me seriously? If I do this, how can I be a mommy and a working independent journalist that people are going to expect that I'm there and I'm prepared and I'm ready and I'm going to ask the questions that needed to be asked? It was just like this tightrope that you had to walk. And we didn't have any of the lean in yet. I wouldn't even have thought to try to go into that corner meeting with the executives and the producers after the show, and they were doing that. How did we do today? And what do we want to do tomorrow? So you didn't have a chance to toot your own horn. You didn't really have an opportunity to show up with ideas because frankly, I didn't really have the chutzpah or whatever to walk into that meeting. And it took many years. But it's interesting, John. I don't remember how long it was after I started the show, but it wasn't too long after I started the show that Barbara Walters was on one day. And she was on to talk about one of her primetime specials, interviewing some celebrity. And I don't remember what her show was, but I just remember that during the commercial break, she said, come here. And she said, I'm going to give you some advice. Do not try to fight for equality. That time has not come, not just here at the show. That time has not come socially in our country. And if you do it, and women are going to try to goad you into doing it, don't do it. Because if you do, you will end up where your predecessors ended up, which is out the door. And in order to get that job, I had to go be interviewed by David Hartman's agent. Now, I don't know if listeners would realize how ludicrous that is, but you don't usually have to go get interviewed by the other talent's agent to get the job. And he said, I need to know, are you willing to be second banana? Like you're going to be Ed McMahon to Johnny Carson, for people who are old enough to have that analogy. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. I understand what the job is, but I know it's one of the best jobs in the world. And I'm coming in with eyes open. And as time goes on, if there's an opportunity to grow my role a little, then so be it. I will say that his first question was the startling question. The first question, literally, when I sat down in the chair across from him was, would I change my hair color? I was like, what? I said, may I just ask you, why would you ask that? And he said, well, you look young. I was young. I was like 29, just almost turning 30. And he said, we don't want you to make David look older. That blonde hair might make you look young. And I said, well, look, if the network executives thought that somehow my hair color didn't play well on television, I'd have the conversation with them. It just seems a little strange to me. And like he let it go and go on to the second banana discussion. That was the time. That was what life was like for women in general back in the late 70s. I don't even know if women could get credit cards in their own name at that point. And interestingly, when I got that call, John, I was still working at Eyewitness News in New York City as a reporter and weekend anchor. And I got the call from my agent and I was like getting ready on my typewriter. That's a dead giveaway. My agent called and said, I just got a call from ABC. They're offering you the job as co-host of Good Morning America. I was like, oh my God, that's great. I'll call you after the show. I've got like 20 minutes to get ready. 20 minutes later, the phone rang again. I thought it was him calling back. And it was my gynecologist saying, congratulations, you're pregnant with your first child. It was like, wonderful. Like the light dilemma. What are you going to do with this one, Lunden? And I could have folded. That probably would have been the expected thing. Oh man, bad timing. But it just, to be very honest, never even occurred to me to do that. It just, okay, how am I going to figure this out? I can't say no. And I'm obviously going to have this baby. And how am I going to figure out how to do it? And you just have to come up with a plan.
Joan, as I've been studying your life and preparing for this interview, and of course, reading your brand new autobiography, Joan, Life Beyond the Script, one of the things that really hit me is you have these life sayings that seems to have guided your whole career. And the moment before you got this role on Good Morning America, I understand laryngitis of some other host might have prompted a decision that you had to make to get out of bed that actually led down the path for you actually getting the opportunity. And I was hoping you might talk about that.
I think I used the analogy in the book of Shirley MacLaine, who is, I forget the Broadway show she was in, that, and she was like an understudy, but she was ready to walk into the starring role. She knew it by heart, and the star broke her leg, and boom, she walked in that night, and there was a big television producer in the audience, and she became a movie star. It's called being ready in the wings and being open to opportunity. These are the things you got to be open to opportunity. And I got a call one morning at, I don't know, it was like maybe 6:30 or so in the morning. And when the phone rang, I looked at my clock, like I'm not due in today to the newsroom until 8 o'clock. But it was the control room calling me from Good Morning America. David Hartman had called in sick. And the co-host at the time was Sandy Hill. And she had come in thinking she could pull it off. And she just had such bad laryngitis that the producer said, this is just not going to work. Call Joan Lunden. She lives right across the street. And I did. I lived like right down the block. And he said, I need you to come in today. And I said, to do what on the show? To do the whole show. Okay. And like I threw on clothes and ran up the block and walked in, and they like got me ready really quickly, as much as they could. And I went on and hosted the whole show. And by saying yes to that opportunity, that was the first time those network producers had an opportunity to see me as a potential host, and that I had walked in and pretty seamlessly pulled off anchoring the whole show that day. And that catapulted my career. So I have this motto. I'm sure you know it by now, but you've read my book. Whenever anyone asks you to do something, just say yes, and then go figure out how to do it. I have people all the time say to me, oh my God, you've just done so many things in your life. It's just unbelievable, especially with all my behind closed doors shows, jumping out of planes and flying in F-16s and F-18s and landing on aircraft carriers. And do they think I was completely like not nervous when I was driving out of my driveway with yet another uniform packed in my suitcase, going till I have to go through the training to do this, to be allowed to do something like this? No, I was nervous. Again, it's because I just have continually said yes that has afforded me this truly unbelievable life. And the hardest part of doing a legacy memoir, in my case, was how are you going to boil this down to 100,000 words? It was like a task.
I hear you. Well, I wanted to give the listeners just a little bit more feel for what was going on when you entered the studio that day, when you got out of bed and ran down there, because as I understand it, you had 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes at the most after they put the makeup and stuff on you, and you have to interview someone off of Broadway. And so you were given this whole outline to interview this famous person that you literally had 60 seconds to prepare for. And the person you're interviewing, I understood, was put off because here this person comes in off the street to interview them. Yes. So I was hoping maybe you could take us there, because I think sometimes people they see the aftermath, but they don't see the moments that you have to walk into. And that's, to me, what defines our lives.
I don't think I expected her reaction. No, I definitely did not anticipate it, but I understand it. She knew that David Berman started on stage in Broadway shows. That's how he started his career, in like Hello Dolly, the waiter that came in, whatever. And she had anticipated this wonderful interview with someone who really understood the stage and Broadway. And she was doing a show called Runaways with all these kids, and the kids were all there and they were all around her. And she's waiting for Denny to, like, I walk over and sit down across from her. And I think she was a little dumbfounded. And I do the intro to camera and I give her the first question. And she really wasn't very nice to me. She was pretty icy. And I get it, but I'll admit I didn't really anticipate that. In the aftermath, I understand it. But it was just one more little thing on that morning that throw me something else to make it just a little bit harder to do this, to walk in and do a 2-hour show live by myself that I've never done before. I had done little pieces on the show, but I hadn't done anything like that. You just sometimes have to rise to the occasion. And I can't even tell you honestly that going into that morning, I was thinking, oh, here's my chance. I'm going to show what I can do. I didn't have time to think that. And a good thing is I didn't really have enough time to get too nervous. That's probably the good thing. It was like, as soon as I walked in the door, they're saying, okay, you're going to start with this interview, then this interview. And I'm like listening, because I wasn't prepared for any of those interviews. And I'm like taking it all in, a little sponge, and just saying, okay, I got it. But it was actually good, because you didn't have too much of an opportunity to get nervous. But that was like really, like, you're picking out an example of my life from a very early stage, like when I was young, all the way through saying, you want this opportunity? Sure, yeah, let's try that on. And then going and doing it. And every time I did one of those, it gives you self-confidence. It grows your self-confidence and your own self-image, your own self-identity. And you start thinking of yourself as someone who can accomplish that. Where the day before you would have said, I don't know if I could do that. And so those are really important. And those are all the things that I really wanted to convey. I tell my story, but I'm sure you saw that in it, even the usage of quotes at the beginning of each chapter. I'm a person who really loves quotes. When I see them and they impact me, I save them. I've got my list of quotes. So when I do a book like this, I can cull through that list. And it was so important to me to find the right quote that would set the scene, that would make you read this quote and say, oh, what's coming in this chapter? That's all part of building the anticipation and then letting those moments unfold and letting them say, oh, God, that's how she did that.
I find this funny because, as I told you before we got on the interview, I just turned in my manuscript and I had gone through painstakingly and attributed quotes at the beginning of every single chapter to do exactly what you're suggesting, to set the tone through someone people would recognize, in some cases more famous than others. But my editor, the first thing she did is she said, I hate quotes at the top of chapters. So the first thing you need to do is remove all of them.
Something at one point they came to me. Now I've done it in every single book. And I don't know if this is my 11th book. And there was no way I was going to do it in this book, but it's gotten more difficult in the publishing industry. And you really have to be able to, my editor just drilled down and made me really painstakingly identify where a quote came from. And I would say it came from somewhere, and they would come back and say, actually, no, that person got it from somewhere else. And like the research we had to do into every one of these quotes in, I don't know, 40 chapters, that's 40 quotes, took so much time and effort on our part, but I didn't care. They were too important to me. So I'm sorry you can't use them, because I love the usage of the quote at the top of the chapter. The title, and I love chapter titles. To me, chapter titles I spend forever on coming up with the right chapter. I love my last chapter title, Surfacing with Intention, which is like something so important in what we're talking about today.
Well, I love it because this whole podcast is about why we need to be intentional with the choices that we make throughout our life. I love what you brought up earlier about saying yes to opportunities. And I'll just share a little bit about my life. I was given this opportunity to join Lowe's Home Improvement as a senior executive, but the task I was being given was to clean up the worst hacking incident that had ever happened in retail. And as I went into this, people have asked me after the fact, how did you even think you could do the job? And when I was thinking about it, I'm like, nothing like this has ever been done before. No one has ever solved this. So it's not like anyone has a resume to solve it. So I just thought I could figure it out. And then when they asked me to build a 200,000 square foot data center, I'd never built anything like that. But if I figured if I could get the right people around me who had, and I hired the right engineering firm, then I could get it done. And I think people let themselves think themselves out of opportunities before they even hit the starting line. Is that what you have found in your own experience?
100%. And I've resonated this thought, I think, probably in a number of the books I've written. And I keep resonating it again and again because it needs to be, is that I think people often hear things that are opportunities and they immediately think, oh, wow, that would be great for someone. Why not for you? And I don't think that people just let ideas and opportunities like pass them by, like just float right by them, because they don't take that moment to consider maybe I could do that. And you don't have to see, as one of the quotes in my book is, you don't have to see the whole staircase. You just have to take the first step. And as you start down, when I was in the very beginning, 23 years old at KCRA TV, an affiliate in Sacramento, California, my hometown, before I ever got to national. And I'd just gone in because someone said, you ought to consider this. There were no women on news back then. There was Barbara Walters. I was almost like it. And so I called and I got this appointment to go in, and I asked them all these questions about what the possibilities were. And after 5 minutes, he said, well, clearly you know how to write an interview. You have the look, you have that it factor. Let me take you down and audition you. I was like, okay. He put me on this news set that I saw every night on TV, and he auditioned me, and he said, I think you have something, but I don't have a job. Like, he just walked in here out of the blue, but we're going to start this new early news show, and I'll keep you in mind. But the weatherman at the station was back behind the set, saw the audition, and followed me out into the parking lot and said, a few stations around the country are hiring weather girls. I'd like to make you Sacramento's first weather girl. And that sounded absolutely, totally uninteresting to me. But thank God I was a smart little whippersnapper who knew an opportunity when I heard it. So I said, okay. He said, okay, be here Monday morning at 5 a.m. It's 5 a.m. because he went on the air and did all this morning drive time weather on the radio that was very important to the Sacramento agricultural valley, all these farmers. And I guess that was the start of my early morning career right out of the box. But then a few months later, they called me, the news director called me in and said, remember when I told you we were going to start an early show? Well, we're going to do something that just a few stations around the country are doing. They're having consumer reports, and this had never been done before. Do you think you could come up with some consumer reports for us? I was like, okay. So I lived in Sacramento, that's the capital of California, and I got in my car and I drove to the Department of Consumer Affairs, and I found their public relations office and said, if I was going to go on television as a consumer reporter, could you give me some news to report? And they said, oh my God, we're always having recalls of products and things we're always trying to get our information on. I got in my car and went to the Department of Agriculture and said, could you give me any information like on a regular basis about food prices or maybe tainted food or things like that? And by the end of the day, I went back into the news director and said, I could do a consumer report every night. Mind you, I was convincing myself of that just as much as I was convincing that news director. But I was making it up, but I was figuring it out, kind of like you figured out how to solve that hacking thing. There was no precedent. There was no other consumer reports on television that I could look at. And so I just put it together and figured out, what does the consumer want to hear? What does the viewer want to hear out there? And started writing up my reports. And okay, I'll tell you a funny one. And I think it's in the book. I'm pretty sure it's in the book. They use something in television called a blue screen, where you sit in front of a blue screen, or a weatherman stands in front of a blue background or a green background.
It's crazy to watch too.
And the camera only sees everything but the blue, so that they see your image. And then they roll a piece of tape or back then it was film, videotape hadn't been invented at that point. And they run a piece of film of a rainy day. So you see this weatherman seemingly standing outside in the rain. So they sent me out with a camera person and said, you're going to do all these agricultural reports, take the camera person with you, and they'll shoot footage of tomatoes and lettuce and meat and milk and blah, 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 blah. So he did all this footage. And so now my first night going on talking about food prices, and I'm in front of a blue screen and they're running the footage that's now been put together. And I didn't realize it, but back in those days, it was a very big thing to wear blue eyeshadow. Okay, it was very trendy, so no judgment. And every time, and there was no teleprompter, so you went by the script in front of you on the desk. And every time I would look down at the script, you would see tomatoes or lettuce or meat, like through my eyes. And needless to say, all of the other reporters up in the newsroom who wondered how in the world this girl just walked in here off the street and got this job, they didn't exactly welcome me with open arms. And they thought it was the funniest thing in the world and didn't tell me for weeks because they just wanted it to keep happening.
Throughout the book, and you've been giving us some great examples, you describe moments where being unflappable became part of the job. But I wanted to ask this in a different way. What do you think being unflappable cost you internally?
There are plenty of times I can think of a million different kind of things that you needed to remain unflappable, even though people were writing things about you in tabloids. First of all, back then we didn't have social media. They would write letters, but they still write letters. I don't like the dress she wore, or the big one for women. Hasn't she gained a little too much weight? That was the big one. You were supposed to be thin if you were on TV. And by the way, I had 3 babies while doing Good Morning America. And they would write things in the tabloids. And you can say, I don't read that, but that's not true. You do see. And if you don't read it, a friend of yours reads it and tells you. And you get dressed down every now and then by the boss who says, I don't like the interview you did yesterday. And no matter what it is, like, you do have to there's a saying that's better to stay even than get even. You couldn't get mad about it. You had to just take it as constructive criticism, whether it was coming from a viewer or it was coming from your producer, and always remain unflappable. And certainly live on television, I mean, no matter what happened, you had to. And sometimes there was a lot of chaos going on that we might hear in our earpiece, and you had to remain unflappable. You were never to let the audience know if there was something going on. The next satellite interview is off. We don't have it. We're going to get something else. We're going to put something else in its place. Okay, so I won't go to that. You really have to just remain cool and calm and collected. And I don't think most people ever necessarily think about that while watching live news on television.
And I know one of the things that I learned through reading the book is that you were quietly rewriting the rules through the course of your career. And one of the first starts of this is you would bring your daughter to work, and it was framed as activism at the time. But little things like that started, I think, to give you permission to expand. But did you feel like that at the time?
I know I was not a flag-waving, bra-burning feminist at all. I was like the mom with the new child that got this big job, and I was just putting one foot in front of the other, trying to figure out how I could do them both at the same time. And I don't think ABC understood. Kudos to them for saying yes to me. Because back then, it wasn't like today's world. There weren't all the contraptions. If you were breastfeeding, you really had to have the baby with you. And while they said yes, and I give them credit, I don't really think that they totally understood what they were saying yes to, or how it would impact the show or the audience or America, society. And the first day back, they planned this big news conference after the show, and we went upstairs to our dressing rooms, and they put all these chairs out and had a nice little breakfast, and they invited all the newspapers, New York Times and the Washington Post and Time and Newsweek and Ladies Home Journal. It was a packed house. And we walked out. David Hartman introduced me, welcomed me to the show. I said a few words. I opened it up to questions. But right before I came downstairs, the PR people came and grabbed me and said, listen, whatever you do, not say anything about the fact that you have a baby upstairs, because these are critics. These are television reporters. They would chew you up and spit you out. They'll never think that you could actually do your job. So, okay, no problem. I didn't plan on mentioning it. So now here I am, and I open up to the questions, and I'm supposed to have this best kept secret. And first question, Time Magazine, we hear you are bringing your baby to work. How did you get ABC to let you do that? Like your eyes dart to the back of the room where all these executives are standing up, and the PR people that just gave you your marching orders. But I had to answer. You not answer. I answered his question. Second question, Newsweek magazine. This show travels the world. How are you going to do that? Again, I had to answer, well, actually, ABC has contractually given me permission to take the baby with me wherever I need to go for as long as I'm breastfeeding or throughout the first year. Oops, I said breastfeeding. And it clearly became very obvious to everyone within the first 5 minutes of that press conference that the breaking news story of the day wasn't what female was the new co-host of Good Morning America. That was a little story. The breaking news that day was that a major media corporation had given a woman permission to bring a baby to work. It was in every paper. And by the way, before the press conference was over, that PR guy went up, scooped my little 7-week-old baby out of the crib, and came. All of a sudden, I saw him walking in with my little baby Jamie in his arms, and he's like, "I bring her to you." He walks right up the center aisle through all the different news reporters, puts her in my arms, and every camera is flashing. And that was the picture on the cover of everything. And I still don't know if ABC really clearly understood at that point what the reaction was going to be by our audience, which was I think that I bonded with the audience so much more quickly because they knew I was showing up. They knew I was prepared for the interviews, but they also knew I was dealing with dirty diapers and spit up. So there was like an interlocutor there that just created the fun, and our ratings soared. And I'm going to tell you a little something that didn't make the book. And it's because I only found this out 6 months ago. I sent my galley off to a couple of producers of GMA and the executive producer at the time I started. I just wanted him to fact check everything. And he got back to me. He said, "I'm going to tell you something." He said, "When you started really showing, the head of entertainment called me and said, 'You got to get Joan Lunden off the air.'" I said, "Why?" He said, "She's showing. Nobody wants to see a pregnant lady walking down the street, let alone on television in the morning when they get up." And he said, "Well, that's not really the reaction that we're getting from our audience. Our audience is all of them are reacting favorably." And he said, "I got together with David Hartman and the vice president in charge at the time, and we powwowed and we decided we just can't do this. It would go against our audience would get upset." So they went against him, and the guy eventually acquiesced and dropped it. And they let me stay in the air until, I don't know, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before delivery. And back then they didn't have all the cute little maternity clothes that they have now. It was like tents. And I said, and he said, "We opted not to tell you." I said, "Oh my God, I'm so glad you did not tell me that back then, because I think it would have just thrown me for a loop if I knew that.
Yeah, it would have destroyed you. Yeah.
Get her out of here." And I'm so glad they didn't tell me. And here I am 50 years later, John, 50 years later, and I find out that story.
It's unbelievable. Well, I think looking back, everything humanized you. And it drew people in because they saw you weren't just a placard, you were a real person, which wasn't what they were accustomed to seeing. So I think it made it appealing. And what I think a lot of listeners might also not realize is during your time with David, which lasted about a decade, if I have it right, he had strict parameters on how the show would begin, how it would close, who got to interview, how much money he made, and other
Money I made.
Yeah, I understand that there was almost like a 10x difference in pay at one point.
Yeah, he
But
probably
then
10 times what I made. Yeah.
But then new ownership came in and he played his cards wrong. And Charlie then comes in. And from the get-go, everything changed. But Charlie was a primary reason for that. What did he do differently in his approach?
Okay, so now your listeners are going to hear one other thing that I just found out at the 50th anniversary this past November. Charlie flew in and Spencer flew in and we all went out to dinner. And Charlie said, "I remember when I first came and I knew that I was like a huge cheerleader. I really thought Charlie would be great. I thought he was he was very smart, but he didn't wear it." And he said, "The day I came to move into the office," he said, "the executives called me in and they said, 'All right, you need to establish yourself immediately as the alpha male. You got to make Joan realize that. You got to make the audience realize that. And he said, I looked at them and said, I think you're really wrong. That's what it's been for the last 10 years. I don't think that today's audience, that was like 1987. And he said, I can't buy into that. I don't think that's right. He said, and then I came to your office. Now, this is the part that I knew. I never knew about that meeting where they told him to come in and be the alpha male until this past November. So it's not in the book either. The book was already put to bed at that point. And he said, and then I know this part. He walked into my office and he sat down across from me and he said, I want to make a deal with you. Let's do this show 50-50. Let's show America that a man and a woman can come together and do a show as equals. And boy, I shot my hand across the desk and said, I'll take that deal. I knew I liked him, but I liked him even more. And that is how we did the show. And I think the audience felt that. And what you usually have a dip in the ratings when one host leaves and they're bringing somebody new on. We did not have a dip in the ratings. The ratings just continued to go up and they stayed that way for the next over a decade.
For those of us who've not been behind the scenes on a show like that, when it comes to a guest is coming on the show and it's a desirable guest, what was the difference between when you were working with David and who got assignments on stories versus how that changed with Charlie? And was it a pretty big shift?
Well, when I was with David, it was any kind of a political leader, world leader, senator, major star in any industry, I knew I wouldn't get the interview. I got the woman stories. I got DIY, do your own. I got cooking spots. I got all the Julia Child spots. I got parenting and nutrition. And the doctor's daughter here, who always thought I'd be a doctor, I hogged any medical spot that I could possibly get my hands on. And he'd let me have them unless they were really important. And that's just what life was like during those years. And every now and then, when he would be out of town and I would be on with someone else, the producers would slip me like an important interview. And that's where they allowed me to take it, be prepared and shine so that they could have confidence in me. And quite honestly, over time, so I grew the confidence in myself. And by the time Charlie came, we took one of our first trips overseas and we got to the hotel. And back in those days, Charlie and I never had a laptop. Today, anchors with laptops in front of them, they're seeing people's comments in real time. We never had a laptop. We couldn't Google anyone that we were about to interview and fact check something. That didn't exist. We got packets and packets of research that we had to read. And I got to my hotel and I saw, oh my God, I'm interviewing the king and queen of Sweden. Like that, it was astounding to me because that never would have happened before. And so it was really a huge kind of power shift. It was like coming out from behind that barrier as a woman. And it worked. It worked for Good Morning America and ABC. The audience loved it. And I see it on my social media every day. My 99,000 BFFs that I don't know, but they're really nice. And I hear it all the time. If I post anything remotely has to do with television or GMA, I have all these people that come in and say, you and Charlie, that pair that we had in our home every morning, we could tell. And you told us like it was. And back then, John, it was so different than today. Like today, they expect anchors to give their opinion. And the audience doesn't really like that, quite honestly. They don't want opinion news. Like we just gave the news. And if I had an interview, if I was interviewing two people with opposing views or moderating a debate, our goal was that at the end of that, you wouldn't know what our opinion was, which, by the way, was somewhat of a challenge. It wasn't always easy to do, but you didn't chime in and say, oh, yeah, you're right. You just didn't do that. And that's a major difference. And I'm really glad that I was in that position for the 20 years that I was and not in today's world. And I think that viewers out there, from what I hear on social media, is that they yearn for those days.
Joan, one of the things that I wanted to make sure we talked about was the journey you had with facing your battle with cancer. And this is very personal for me because I lost my sister to pancreatic cancer
Oh,
last year.
sorry.
And as I was reading your story and remembering some of my conversations with my sister, there was a similar aspect to it. You write candidly about fear, and not just of dying, but of disappearing. And Carolyn told me the same thing. For you, how did that shift your definition of courage? And what surprised you most about who showed up for you and who you expected to and didn't?
Well, certainly you learn when you go through something like that, who are the people, friends and family that show up for you. And in the aftermath, they become your besties. They become the people you know that you can count on and that will always have your back and always be there. But I think the main thing that I wanted to convey in telling that story, and of course I told it in its entirety in another book had I known, but I felt it was important to touch on it for a chapter in this book too, because within 24 hours, maybe less, it occurred to me that I always thought I'd be a doctor like my dad. My dad was a cancer surgeon back at a time when there wasn't radiation, there wasn't chemo. And I just got this gift. And I know it's hard to imagine somebody thinking of a cancer diagnosis like that. But in this weird way, it was this gift that just dropped in my lap. But I said, I can finally fulfill that legacy. I can finally pick up that torch and run with it. And I'm not going to go through this journey as a victim, as a patient. I'm going to go through this journey as an advocate. And I'm going to learn everything I can about breast cancer and about treatments and I'm going to take that by phone into every appointment and I'm going to show them. And I got to tell you, John, I've had countless women come back to me and say, thank you so much for sharing all of that because you took the scary out of it. It's allowed me to, not to mention I went in front of Congress, in front of the FDA to testify in favor of mandatory mammogram reporting. Like I started becoming involved in the advocacy for women. And we got that legislation passed so that now when a woman goes to get a mammogram, they can find out if they have very dense breast tissue, which masks cancer. It shows up white on a mammogram, exactly the same as cancer. And that now that they know that they need an ancillary test. I only learned that by going for an interview. I was sent to do an interview for a health show I was doing. I learned it from Dr. Susan Love, who wrote the breast book, and came back, like marched into my gynecologist, said, write me a script for an ancillary test. And I got a clean 3D mammogram that day of my diagnosis, and then went across the full and found out in an ultrasound that ancillary test that I otherwise wouldn't have known to have. And that left that I had cancer. And I said, I have to pass this message along. That's really what lit this fire in me. You have to do something about this. You have to make sure that women are told this, and you have to go out and spread the word as far and wide as you possibly can. And for the next 5 years, I don't even know how to tell you how many breast cancer luncheons I did and how many times I went back and forth to Washington. I couldn't even get all the female senators to sign on to this legislation. Why? Because everybody knows that the next domino to fall is getting the insurance company to pay for this ancillary test. And they were bigger, stronger, and more well-financed than us little grassroots ladies that were coming in there and saying, can I come in and talk to you about this, Senator? And I'd never gone to Washington in that capacity. I'd always gone as a reporter where they opened the door and go ahead and set up the lights. Now I was like knocking on the door. Would you please sign this bill? It was a totally different experience. And I loved every minute of it. And it made that journey, it was so hard. I had a year of chemo. I lost my hair, I lost my eyebrows, and you lose everything. But at the same time, it was an amazing year. And I wouldn't have passed it up for anything. And I reached a lot of women. I made a difference. And seriously, John, if on my tombstone, all it said was she helped other women in their journey in breast cancer, if it just said that, I'd be okay with it. But I've shared these journeys I've shared these moments in my life whether it was dealing with this huge change leading GMA, and I wrote a book about dealing with change, or whether it was aging and going through the things that all of us women go through. So I write a book, my last one, Why Did I Come Into This Room? A candid conversation about aging, like all these things all the way through. Because I've chosen to share them, that's what's given me the opportunity for self-fulfillment. That's what's given me this opportunity to feel like I made my mark on the world. And maybe that mark is even more important than my incredible career in journalism.
Well, I wanted to ask you a follow-on question about that, Mark, Joan. My aunt, who is also a breast cancer survivor, is the one who wanted me to ask you this, but her father, my grandfather, had dementia, and it was very hard, and she was closer to it than I was, but it was so difficult to see a person who was so brilliant reduced to the state that he was in. And on this topic of advocacy, she wanted me to ask you, you were an advocate for your mom who had dementia, and you're an advocate on behalf of the elderly and caregivers. She wanted me to ask you, what current challenges do you feel right now are the most important to address for the elderly and caregivers?
And once again, dealing with my mom, and then I just felt that I needed to help other Americans get prepared. You don't want to make all these decisions and figure out what caregiving to an elderly parent is all about when the crisis occurs. And yet, unfortunately, that's how most of us do it. In today's world, the reason why I went to Washington to advocate for passing an addition to the Family Medical and Leave Act was wonderful. The Family Medical Leave Act finally gave women and then subsequently men the ability to leave when their child is born and not lose their job at work. But now I went and said, that's not the only time people need to have protection. They need to at the end of life. This is like at the beginning of life. At the end of life, we have a nation full of people that are having to leave jobs and dip into their own retirement to take care of aging parents and aging spouse and anybody that's in your circle that you become responsible for advocating or their actual care. And this is going to become a bigger and bigger issue because the population in our country is going through this very rapid change. And by 2030, we're going to have far more people over 65 than we have under 18. And as we have these wonderful advancements that are keeping us all alive, this huge older population is going to live longer and longer. And it's starting to get good publicizing so that people start understanding I'm going to have to maybe live another 20 years when I only thought I was going to live another 5 or 8 years, and I have to plan for this. But I'm here to say to everybody out there right now who has aging parents, and you might not even consider them aging yet, if they're in their 60s, sit them down and take your phone and interview them. Start with them about what life was like when they were young. And then what was life like when, you and dad or you and mom met? What was I like as a kid? And they might, if they're older, they won't remember what they had for lunch 15 minutes ago, but they can connect with these memories. Now you've got them in this wonderful place that they're talking about their life and they're sharing with you. And this is your opportunity to say, and by the way, as long as we're talking about this, is there a relative that had any kind of a chronic illness that you know that maybe other people don't know, like an aunt, an uncle, and grandpa or grandma? Did they have like polyps? Did they have colon cancer or breast cancer or anything that maybe didn't get talked about because in the old days they didn't talk about it? That's your chance to find out that so you know your health risks. And then you can say, all right, we've been talking about the past. Let's talk about the future. I'm the one, I can be your advocate. I want to know how you see your future. If you want to stay here in the house, if you can. And instead of sitting down saying, all right, I'm going to be responsible for you, so tell me all this stuff, which they're not going to want to do because it makes them face some mortality. And it's an uncomfortable situation. This is a really cozy, familial opportunity to get them to look at their future. So that's something that I always suggest people do. But in the meantime, make sure you are signed on to their bank account. Make sure you have all the important papers you need. Make sure there's a HIPAA release, because hospitals and assisted living places can't talk to you, and their doctors can't talk to you unless your name is on that HIPAA release, and only one name. So don't get the most worrisome person in your family. Don't let the sibling who's the worry wart put her name on that. And make sure you have a durable power of attorney for financial and for health, and get them to do a living will. A will is for what they're going to leave after they're gone. But what about when their life is in the balance and you don't know whether they want to have a feeding tube, be put on a respirator, donate their organs, and they're uncomfortable conversations, but you can do it. You can say, Mom, Dad, my husband and I just saw this. We just listened to this podcast and they told us we should do this. So we just did this with each other. Have you guys done that? There's ways you can get them to open up without making them feel like you're forcing them to face their mortality.
We just did this with my parents, and it is tough because you realize they are getting older, but it was actually them who forced the issue on my brother and I. But I'm glad we did it, as painful as it was. Joan, today we've really talked about how for part of your life you were mastering the script, and now you're in this new chapter where that script has grown in ways you probably never expected it would have. So my last question for you is, for someone who's listened today who feels their best chapter is behind them, what's your advice for them?
No, you're never too old to write a new script, ever. And a lot of people do feel that way. And that's why I just felt it was so important to write this book, not just to say, oh, look at all the things I've done, but to let them realize that I've rewritten my script, I don't know, like a dozen times at least since I left GMA. And I think and a lot of people, when I'm out places, they'll say, oh, how are you enjoying retirement? Meanwhile, I've got 5 campaigns I'm working on. And my husband always says, just tell them you're enjoying retirement, please. Don't feel compelled to tell them all the things you're still doing. But it's important for them to understand that I've still been open to opportunity. I'm lucky that having had the platform I've had, a lot of things come my way. And why pass up the opportunity to do all these meaningful things? And it might not be the situation where you have those kinds of opportunities, but that doesn't mean that you can't plant a new garden, learn a new hobby, join a group, be a reader. A reader never goes to bed alone. You can always be ensconced in someone else's story. And then join a book club, because it's really important as you start to get older that you stay engaged and you keep talking with people. These are some of the most important aspects of successful aging. And I thought that was important to talk about in writing this book. So I'm excited for them to read Life Beyond the Script.
Joan, thank you so much for joining us today. This, I'm sure, will be a fan favorite for the Passion Struck listeners. It was such an honor to have you.
Thank you so much.